Dear Vets of Tomorrow. In this podcast, Maya talks with the Dutch Professor Franck Meijboom. He's an ethicist and he teaches and researches, especially in the field of the relationship between animal and humans, and he's involved in many projects and organizations. In the first part of the podcast, they talk about his background, ethics in vet schools, and his impact on policy making and the implementation of this. In the second part of the podcast, they talk about the Center for Sustainable Animal Stewardship, ethics on fish, animal testing, and farming ethics.
Hello, Frank. It's lovely to have you here at Dare to Care today. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Would you like to start with a small introduction and tell us what you do?
Well, I work at Utrecht University. We are two places at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. That's my main position, and also at the Faculty of Humanities. And that tells a little bit of my background. I'm trained as an ethicist and try to combine questions of how we as humans deal with animals, also with questions of animal ethics and more applied issues in terms of, well, also the future ideas of how we relate ourselves to animals and animal welfare. And I do that both in research and in teaching, but also a lot in advisory projects.
So I'd like to start off with a tricky question. I believe you research quite a lot. And that would be, how can people and animals live in harmony together?
It's a very good question, and indeed it is tricky in the sense that it is of course possible, but the current problem, I think, is that there are quite a lot of people already on this globe and even more animals, whereas, for all kind of reasons, we as humans quite often take our interest first and then start to think about animals. I think if we know more about animals, and not only in terms of biological knowledge, but also in terms of taking our view towards animals more seriously, it is possible to structure our way of living and our society in a way where it's not only humans first and then animals, but where there is more kind of as you say harmony or balance. That's not to say that we as humans have to give up our whole agenda for animals. But I think already I would say if you see where there are conflicts between animals and humans, we quite often start from the fact that and animals are the problem. Yeah. So we are confronted with zoonotic diseases, or we are confronted with aggressive dogs, and then the animals are a problem. Whereas quite often it's not to say we should flip the coin and say we as humans are always the problem, but if you look at where those problems come from, to start from a more integrated perspective and say, okay, how do, for instance, health of humans and animals, and in this case also environment, interact? Can we go to more smart solutions that not only point in the direction of one party, in our case quite often the animals? So I think that's at least a start, which is not very concrete in the sense that it's specific for each context, but I say to have a more integrated idea rather than waiting until there is a conflict or a problem and then point to the animal as the wrongdoer.
Why did you decide to pursue a career in ethics, and specifically the ethics of human-animal interactions? Because as you say, they're very complicated.
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's a bit of personal background. It was not such a deliberate choice in the sense that when I was a high school student, I actually wanted to do something in medicine, and I actually had the idea to study dentistry, which in the Netherlands has a very limited number for first-year students. So I couldn't start in my first year, and then just actually for a first year, I started to do theology. Something completely different. I thought, okay. And actually I liked that very much. So in the end, I finished my theology study, combined it with philosophy, and specifically ethics. And there, ethics started already quite soon during my study. I liked the combination of more applied questions with theoretical challenges. in the end of the 90s, I started to do research on genetic modification of food. There already the first links with the animals came on the table at that moment more as part of consumption, but soon after also in other projects on animal diseases, on breeding technologies. And from there on, I shifted more and more towards animal ethics, but still, and that's maybe a little bit where the human-animal interaction came from. I started from all kind of questions where we as humans are in relation to all kinds of animals, and raises questions not only about what is the status of the animal, what is the welfare of the animal, but if we have certain ideas about that animals should be taken seriously, that has an impact on what we are allowed to do as humans. And then all kind of what you say, difficult questions start.
Well, it is a rather interesting turn of career choices from dentistry to ethics, but it turned well.
Yeah.
So you teach ethics at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Utrecht University, as you said, and several other courses related to this area. What is the main aim of the program, and how is it structured?
I think the main aim is to enable future veterinarians to make their own ethical assessment, and to, I would say not to distantiate it, but at least to the ethics courses are not so much to tell students what's right and wrong, but really to enable them to make decisions. It's not to say that ethics is not about what's good or bad or better or worse. Of course, also in teaching, if students have exams with me, I can tell, this answer is not good or not good enough. But that's more about the quality, I would say, of their arguments than to say this position is wrong. Yeah. So, the aim is to teach them to think critically, to reflect. I would say also, and I do not know whether it's typically for the Utrecht students. I think it's to a certain extent typical for veterinarians to be very practical, problem solving. So and of course for a good reason, because you are confronted with an animal in need and something has to be done. Where in societal issues and especially ethical issues, quite often it's not the idea that you have to solve immediately, but to have a step back and think, okay, what's happening? Yeah, so do not run immediately, but slow down. And sometimes then you have good reasons to run in the end, because there is a need to improve. But so I think that's the aim, and that's also reflected in the way it's structured. So it's a kind of a line from the first year to the third year bachelor, where at the start it's very much on making students aware that they work in a societal environment. So, and that's already linked to the idea that they are professionals. So, in the end, a veterinarian should be skilled, it should be experienced. But I think veterinarians are much more than that. So you have certain societal responsibilities, sometimes even by law, that you're allowed to prescribe medication to perform certain acts that I as a non-vet am not allowed to. So that comes with responsibility. So it's making them aware, I would say, in the first year, some basic knowledge on ethics, but also in that course on law and environmental sciences. And that builds up in the next years. And then not only on the theoretical level, but what we try to do is to link that to specific themes. So, ethics and law in the context of welfare, or in the context of, animal diseases, or in the context of sustainability. Because I don't think it's relevant to teach, veterinary students, so they become ethicists or so they become legal experts, but they should become good professional veterinarians. And that, in my opinion, should include knowledge from ethics, from social science, from law.
So does this course go on during the master's level, or is it only for bachelors?
This specific course, so this is a compulsory course for bachelor. In a master, then you have to, of course, make your decision in what way you will specialize, at least in Utrecht. So, for instance, in equine or companion animals or farm animals. And then it depends a bit on the specialization, what type of course you get, but also in a master, we continue. And for instance, in farm animal health, there we link it to the practical part of the education. So when students go to farms and practice there as future veterinarians, they will come back a number of weeks, and during these weeks, there's, for instance, one week of one day of ethics, where I do not only teach, but also their cases are much more central. And in the last year, it's only about their case studies. So then they bringing in their case studies, and we have kind of group discussions, and quite often these cases have similarities about how to deal with euthanasia, or how to deal with conflicts between your professional ideas and those of the animal owner. So of course sometimes they're very classical ones. Sometimes it's really a novel. But so that's in the master. But more, I would say, closer to the needs of the individual students. Also because they are much closer to the reality of the veterinary practice.
That's fascinating. So it's actually their own cases, real life cases from their practice.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That sounds like a very good opportunity to learn. And I'd love to see this, in other veterinary faculties as well. And of course, as with any other class, some students are more interested than others. How do you close the gap between avid learners and students who don't see the value of ethics in veterinary education? And how do students change after completing the ethics course?
Okay, that's a very good question. I must say I experience a positive development to a certain extent, I would say. So I'm teaching now for about 12, well, even more, but at least that I'm related to the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine as staff members now 12 years. When I started, there was really a group of students who did not like it, did not see the added value at all, full stop. And of course, there are still students who it's definitely not their favorite topic, but I think a lot of students now are aware that they are trained in a context where society have ideas about how to deal with animals, and have ideas about how professionals should act. So in that sense, that there is a change. Of course, it's difficult to get all students attracted, partly because in the first year you have certain students that, well, okay, this is nice, but it's not so relevant because I'm just studying veterinary medicine, and if I was interested in ethics or law, then I probably would have started something in philosophy or in legal studies. So that's problem one. Later on in the study, so for instance, in the master's, you are confronted with students say, well, yes, this is very interesting, and I see the relevance, but to be honest, I rather improve on my skills to do a proper cesarean section, because if that goes wrong, the farmer or the dog owner is much more concerned than when I do a bad ethical assessment, which to a certain extent I can understand, but so it is difficult. At the same time, what we at least try to do is to link it, as I said, to more practical themes like welfare, like sustainability, like public health. So to show the relation with the veterinary field, for those who would like to do more, because this is also important, we have a elective course in a master. That's a 5-week course, ethics only, and we offer that 2 times a year. And the interesting thing is that back in 2011 we started that with a little less than 10 students. Only 1 time a year. Currently, as I said, the course is offered 2 times, and the last, I think 5 or 6 sessions, we had between 20 and 30 students. So in that sense, that there is an increase of students in their masters who like to do this as an elective. Then you say the difficult question is to what extent they change. That's of course very difficult. In general with ethics courses, and some of my colleagues also try to do research and on that topic. The problem is that the knowledge and skills part is relatively easy to check. And that's also what we do in exams. So you can say if you pass, well, then you have certain knowledge. But it also has to do with a certain mindset, a certain awareness. And that's actually something that should develop over time. And it's not so easy to understand and monitor at the same time. But that's the question is, what is the cause and what's the result? For instance, in Utrecht, we now have a student group. It's called Vet Involved, and they are structured as a group of students around questions of animal welfare, societal issues. That definitely is not the result of my teaching. At the same time, it shows a certain awareness among students, and that's quite a substantial group as well. So in the sense, I would say it fits to certain developments you see in society, and in that sense, I think it contributes to that. But at the same time, although I'm glad we have the space we have in the curriculum, if we only focus on strictly the ethics part, so if we skip law and environmental studies, probably it's one EC each year. Yeah, so it's not that much. I mean, I really see it as the entire course, which is called Animals, Vets, and Society, and that's with law and environmental studies. Then it's for the whole bachelor 7.5 EC, so that's a little bit more substantial, but that's everything together. So it's, as I said, it's difficult to really pinpoint where the students change. Maybe the best thing is that from time to time I meet past students, and they say, well, now I see the relevance in practice. Okay, that's good. I think because that's at least the aim. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just a really nice feeling. I can imagine to meet old students who tell you that, actually your course was useful, yeah, and that they're using this knowledge in their everyday practice. And you also teach students from departments other than veterinary medicine. Do you see any differences in teaching vet students and students that chose ethics as their main area of interest? And also, how do students from outside of the animal world perceive ethical dilemmas occurring in human-animal interactions?
I quite often use a tool that's developed by, amongst others, Peter Sendo, and that's the Animal Ethics Dilemma tool, which asks a number of along the line of cases, and based on that you get a kind of profile. So the idea that we should not use animals at all because of animal rights, or that's about our relational view to animals, or more a utilitarian focus. And I think the interesting thing is that within at least the Utrecht veterinary students, there always is a very strong, I would say, close to a utilitarian idea of dealing with animals. So you should do it in a proper way. you should be nice and good to animals, but as such, there is no principled objection to use animals. Whereas I also teach a bachelor honors course for pharmacy, where quite often there is a good group who say, well, I'm close to animal rights. Yeah, so it's not only about caring well for animals; it's also about, in the end, we should stop with it. And of course, you could say
so more of an abolitionist perspective.
Yeah,
you could say.
yeah, yeah. And of course, it's more. I would say it's on a scale. So it's not to say that I'm confronted with abolitionist only groups. You see certain changes during the groups. When I teach in the applied ethics master, so these are those who have a philosophy or at least humanities background, quite often they are different in the sense that they of course do not have the practical knowledge, which sometimes is a reason to explain what's going on, but also quite often raise completely new and different questions. So where veterinarians in let's say the discussion of pedigree dogs have all kinds of ideas and maybe also understand why it's still there. These students may be much more critical and say, well, it's ridiculous that these breeds are still in place. So I think you see the differences. But, well, maybe, as I said, it also has a little bit to do how close you are to the animal practices you're talking about.
I remember there was a research that kind of compared veterinarians or vet students to students of other degrees, and vet students definitely had a lower level of empathy because they were closer to animals in general and animal practice. And I feel like this is very, visible, even in the number of vegetarians and vegans, for example, that you can see in vet students, like in vet schools, and then you compare to the humanities, for example. It's completely different.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
this is telling.
Whereas I think, and that would be interesting to study. There is, and it's not something I studied now, but a little bit more than a feeling I have. It also depends a bit on, and in a way, students specialize. So you have those who really start studying veterinary medicine because they would like to do. Specialize in companion animal health, and these are, if you for instance talk about food and vegetarianism, are much more prone to be critical to all kind of practices in livestock farming. Whereas of course those who specialize in farm health may be critical to the current practice as well, but not to the system as such, or to for instance meat eating. So I think even within, I would say, the veterinary profession, you see quite serious differences.
So coming back to teaching ethics, what do you think are the main difficulties in teaching ethics, and what would you change in the curriculum?
Personally, I would say the real challenge is to bring ethics to the students, and at the same time to trigger them to come to ethics. Yeah, so it's I on the one hand I can make it, and that's not only easy in the way of level, but I can make issues so close to their own context that they understand and see the need, and of course that also has to do with level. So that's one part. But if I do that, then still the students remain in their own comfort zone. Yeah, so that they go, okay, well, that's ethics, and most of the time it's complicated, and all those cases where public do not complain, then we do not have a problem. Well, that's not the case. Yeah, so there are a lot of things where maybe no discussion is going on, but still maybe a good reason for veterinarians to reflect on it. So it's also the trigger to get them out of their comfort zone, and to start discussing. I think that's the real challenge, because it asks quite a lot from me and my colleagues to adjust our teaching to the veterinary practice, but also the other way around, to get students so far that they are to stand also courageous enough to say, okay, well, I make myself vulnerable and start to think about my own background assumptions and maybe also about my ideals. For the curriculum, it implies that currently it's the ethics and law teaching is a kind of well, the good thing now is that it is from year 1 to year 3. So the idea is that there is a kind of continuing line, which also improves in difficulty and makes students more independently able to deal with those societal issues. The Utrecht problem now is that it comes in bits and pieces. So if you are a first year student and you have the first lecture you attend, and then the next workshop you are there as well. But the second one, you just had too much drink the day before and you pass. You skip, and maybe the third one you're ill. Then it could happen that the first one is in September, and the 2 others you missed, and the fourth one you're there again. But that could be at the end of October. Yeah. So then still for students to be aware that this was a line where it was about ethics, it was once about law, and even if the good students are now a little bit more to say, well, they skip, but even if you are there, then still it may be with a cycle of every 2 weeks. But in the meantime, you had a difficult test on locomotion or on breeding and fertility, so there are of course a lot of things that are still considered to be, well, let's say mildly equally important, but for some students, for most of the students, I would say more important, in the sense that because if you do not pass that, that's it's about difficult knowledge. It's the first time you're here, whereas about law is of course also something that really requires specific knowledge, but especially with ethics, it's sometimes okay, if you can discuss properly, you will pass anyway. Yeah. So I think the what I still would like is to cluster it more, preferably based on kind of not so much case studies in the sense that animal X with owner Y, but maybe say 2 animal welfare problems which are quite prominent in, let's say, equine veterinary medicine and one in livestock. These are the central cases, and you work on that from law, from ethics, from veterinary medicine for 1 or 1.5 weeks. You finish that with a group assignment or an individual assignment, and that's it. But that's a bit of an ideal. It's not, at least in the current curriculum, not so easy to arrange that. At the same time, I'm glad that because we came from a situation where we really had one course completely fully at the end of the 3rd year bachelor's on ethics and law, and that was of course much more easy to recognize for the students, but at the same time had the problem that you were trained as a vet student for almost 3 years in a certain way, and then suddenly we had to tell that yes, but there are values, there are societal discussions that you had to relate to, and so it's that has, I think, even more disadvantages than the current system we are now in.
Definitely, I agree that I would love to see ethics being, kind of taught in consecutive years and not in a cluster in 1 year. Because, for example, in my school, we only had ethics during the 1st year, and it was an elective. And then during the 2nd year, we kind of had welfare with ethics, and that was mandatory, but it was just, the 1st and 2nd year, and that's it. So, really, truly not enough. So apart from teaching, you conduct extensive research, and your work influences governmental policies, such as ethical frameworks in biotechnology. How did your collaboration with Dutch authorities work out? And are you planning to address other areas of state policy regarding the human-animal relationship as well?
Yeah, I think that there are more or less three ways in which I have the links with policy. One is the most straightforward. It's from time to time we get questions from the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality to do research on specific topics like euthanasia of animals and the discussions on what's the right moment and how to deal with responsibilities. Quite some time ago, also on a more fundamental discussion on what are underlying assumptions to justify the current regulation on animal use. So these are really specific projects that are asked by the ministry. The second one is in advisory committees on specific topics. So I've been member of the scientific advisory committee on we call it adoption of seals in the Netherlands, or rehabilitation of seals. So that's quite a discussion in the Netherlands because at the Wadden Sea in the north we have quite a big population of both harbour seals and grey seals, and that big population was quite different in the 1980s. So then we had a very strong urge to start up rehabilitation centres, privately run, so there's no subsidies from the government, but they need a license. So there's still a discussion there on animal welfare, population health, and environmental or ecosystem discussion. So that was, for instance, one example where a practical question from the government was, and a committee was installed where I was a member of, and I've been in more of that type of committees. And the third one is I've been now a member of the Council on Animal Affairs for a number of years, and that's an advisory committee on animal welfare, animal health in general for the Ministry of Agriculture, which is I think still a very nice platform because we have around 35 council members from all kind of fields. So I'm then from ethics and humanities. And there's one other philosopher, but there are biologists, veterinarians, but also representatives from animal protection organizations, but also from industry. So to a certain extent, something interesting happens there, in the sense that it's of course not society, because you simply lack any lay person, but you have a platform where all kind of interest comes at the table, but where we also have an atmosphere where it's not only bargaining, but say, okay, you are there not because you are a representative of organization X, but you have that background and you are there on personal title. And I like that because there we have also the freedom to pick up themes where we think the government should talk about. So we have advisory tasks which are required by the government, but also those that we take up ourselves. So I think 4 years ago we thought fish welfare is something that is still under radar. and we come with an advisory report on fish welfare. The same on insects. So these are so it's not science. So in that sense, it's of course we try to have good quality, but we do not do research in the council ourselves. But it's bringing the state of art together, and from there on also try to come with certain viewpoints. And actually, the last years, it's no longer only for the Minister of Agriculture, but also, for instance, the policy on nature management is at the level of the provinces in the Netherlands. So from time to time, also we say, look at the position of animals and animal population in nature management, and that's much more in discussion with the provinces in the Netherlands. So I think that's the three ways where my research is linked to policy. And I think the interesting thing is that it's not only let's say bringing. So it's not only I'm doing research, I'm teaching, and then I translate that information to practical policy issues. But the interesting is that it also works the other way around. So in these projects, you come across real life questions, or just like in the Council of Animal Affairs, you pick up something where you say, okay, that's not on the table, yes, but maybe we have to do something more seriously on, let's say in something like insect welfare. And that again has benefits for my research projects as well.
So I'd just like to mention to our listeners that we do have a very interesting podcast about insects. So yes, I would highly recommend giving it a listen. And how do you make sure that the ethical frameworks on paper, so the frameworks that you are actually discussing, during these councils and whatever, that actually, they're a result of your research, how do you ensure that they're actually being implemented?
This is a very good question. It's I would say in the Council of Animal Affairs we developed a kind of ethical framework in 2010, and I was involved in that back then already. What I would say the risk so I run, I would say, is to say that I need to be involved in all those advisory projects, because there always is something like ethics involved. And from time to time, I have the joke with the secretary of the council. Say, okay, is there any advisory project that you are not formally or informally involved in? But at the same time, the good thing is that it is a joke, because within the council there are sufficient people who do not have the formal ethics background, who are aware of the fact that there are a lot of value-laden assumptions in all kind of topics that we discuss in that council. So I think that is maybe even more important than to say my framework or my research had to be included in the advisory documents, that those who are council members or who are members of the advisory committee that I'm chairing are aware that this is not a kind of add-on. Yeah, so it's a kind of integrated part of the advisory projects. So that's, I think, what I hope at least to achieve, that people do not only think if difficult and if ethics, then Frank. That would be nice as well. But mostly it's okay. But we can do something ourselves as well. Yeah. So it's not. I think one of the serious problems is what you quite often see is when there is a serious issue at stake related to values, that the reflex is to say, okay, we have to install an ethics committee, and it's not to say that that is wrong by definition, but quite often it's only a way to park the real issue, instead of think, okay, this asks for a more fundamental debate, where, just like I said with the students, to trigger them to come out of their comfort zone, also for policy advisors or for farmers or whoever else are involved in that debate. So I think that may be even more, I would say, my challenge for all those committees than to really safeguard that every comma and point of my research is reflected in all those research, all those advisory projects.
Honestly, I'd love to see this on all kinds of different levels, instead of outsourcing the work to ethics committees, kind of thinking about what we can, as you said, about the fundamental debate, to actually do the thinking ourselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, also using ethical committees, because that's very important. And you're also the head of the Center for Sustainable Animal Stewardship, another thing you're involved in.
And if you'd like to find out more about the Centre for Sustainable Animal Stewardship, then you can start part 2 of the podcast. In part 2, they also talk about ethics on fish, animal testing and farming ethics.